A very happy Sunday evening to all of you. On behalf of MTC Global family, I extend a hearty welcome to all of you for the day 2 session of our today's FDP program. I have already shared the link, the feedback link in our WhatsApp group. So all of you can give your feedback at the end of the session. That would help us in our upcoming programs. Thank you once again for all of your active participation and the support. Dr. Subhendu Dey sir already has joined our session. So I request sir to kindly please take it forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And good evening. Welcome, everybody. Uh, I hope you had a good time to think through what we discussed yesterday. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the various other sections of a research paper. And uh, I will keep giving you tips in terms of what's absolutely a must when it comes to writing a research paper. As we looked at, let's say, the abstract, the introduction section yesterday, and we did a part of the literature review. Now, I had promised you that before the start of the session, I will be sharing with you the entire PowerPoint presentation, so you can download that. I have already given the link there, shared it with all of you. So somebody had asked yesterday about the rubric, so I would like all of you to spend a quick 2 minutes looking at the rubric. And in case there are any specific queries, we will take that up. And so let me just start the section by taking you through once again a tough journey. Now, welcome back, day 2, and this is what usually happens. We struggle. When I say we struggle, the struggle is actually real. Many times we really find it difficult what to write. We have lots of thoughts in our mind, but how to put it across, how to write that, how to make a successful paper out of it, it becomes very, very difficult at times. So welcome back to that troublesome journey once again. I will stop for 2 minutes. You can have a look at the rubrics, and if there are any queries, I will take that. Uh, After that, I will move on to the next part of the literature review.
Good evening, sir. Prasad here. Yes, sir. So, sir, actually, my doubt yesterday was we will be collecting some papers, right, sir? Ones which we felt, okay, these are useful. Now, in the rubrics, as you mentioned, the literature review should contain all these sections. So, from each paper, we have to identify these points, right, sir? Or is it that some papers may qualify and some papers may not qualify for these sections? How to understand that?
Now, it is not about some paper qualifying and some paper not qualifying. Collectively, the literature, if you look at the various categories and the criteria, you will find that, let's say, if you look at go back to the first slide on Boat and Wheels standards and criteria, you'll find what we are talking about first was coverage. Now, in that, we talk in terms of inclusion and exclusion of literature. So, which literature needs to be included and which literature does not need to be included? Now, once we have looked at the entire literature, we sift through the literature, take all those which are to be included and which are not to be included. And now, if you come to the slide on literature review scoring rubric, let me also put it up here for you. Just give me a second. So it will be easier for you to have a look at the screen instead of not this. Yeah. So, if you look at this, uh, what is it that you're looking for in coverage? You're looking for whether there is a justified reason for including certain papers or excluding certain papers from review. Now, what it the rubric does is it gives you, you know, if let us say you have not discussed the criteria for inclusion or exclusion, but you have taken certain papers, then you put 1 mark to that, which means that it is absolutely at the lower end of the coverage. But if you have discussed the literature included and excluded, then you have moved to the next level. But if you have justified the reasons for inclusion and exclusion of the literature, then you have probably done justice to the category of coverage. So same way you can look at synthesis and look at each of those criteria, and you'll find one, two, three. And if you look at methodology, you'll find four also, where it is not just critiquing the methods, it is also about whether you have introduced new methods to address the problems, etc. So if you look at it, you will find that when you have done your literature review, and based on each of these category and criteria, you start putting it in the rubrics, which means you ask yourself the question, have I discussed all the research methods? Have I identified what were the main methods and have I discussed them? If not, then it is one, which means it is not acceptable. If you have discussed some of the methods, then it is two. Again, not acceptable. But if you have critiqued the research methods, yes, it is acceptable. However, the the most vital thing that you can do is you have not only critiqued the research methods, you have also introduced new methods to address the problems. So this is kind of self-check. You can look at this, you can analyze what you have done, and based on the rubric, you will yourself be able to read as to how well your literature review has been done. So that is where the rubric will help you. Does that
Yes,
answer the
yes,
question
sir.
you had asked yesterday?
Yes, sir. Yes, got it, sir. Very clear now.
Any specific query on this? I will leave it for 2 minutes. You can just go through it quickly. If there is anything that you wish to clarify, I'd be very glad to do that. And today we will be going further slow, and I want you to look at each and every point that I'm going to tell you with that kind of focus. So if this is clear with all of you, then I can move on to the next part. Can we move ahead?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So let's move on. So we'll start with the various methods of literature review. Uh, okay. Can anybody tell me what are the various methods of doing literature review? How do we do literature review?
Systematic
This
literature
is
review,
Srinivas.
bibliometric,
Okay. Okay.
And
Yeah, one is systematic
meta-analysis,
literature review, one can be
and I
semantic.
think meta-synthesis is also one of the method for reviewing literature.
Okay, good. So let's look at the major ones, which I have put down here for all of you. The first that we look at is the traditional narrative literature review. Now, in traditional narrative literature review, you basically use your own judgment to select the representative literature. So if I'm working on a topic, I would look for certain keywords, and based on those keywords, I'll search for some papers, and then I will use my judgment for taking those papers. So I'm not really going to be so very meticulous in terms of uh, following each and every step which, let's say, a systematic literature review follows. Now, traditional narrative is usually uh, the, the primary form of literature review that most researchers take up. Uh, of course, now times have changed, so I find that many of you are using a whole lot of softwares to do your work. But let's stick to this first, and then we will get into if there is a better way. All right. I'm not going to go into details about meta-analysis. You can look at it as analysis of analysis, and usually it started from medical science, and now there's a lot of meta-analysis used in the social sciences as well. But we're not going to get into details. Meta-synthesis, again, which is synthesizing all the analysis together. Uh, Systematic literature review. Now, the good part about it is that for a young researcher, one can always be a little more systematic and get into systematic literature review, which will help you keep track of the entire literature very, very easily. So, in this,
Thank you.
the the methods used to identify and select the literature are very clear. They can be reproduced, uh, and you're not using kind of assumption which can bias your opinion. So therefore, systematic literature review is always much better and much preferred than the traditional narrative form. Excuse me. Now, the traditional narrative form, as I said, it involves you have to read as much literature as possible. You have to assess the importance of each of the uh, literature that you are reading. You then have to create arguments based on what is the current state of research. So you create your own argument. But if you recall, yesterday I was talking about many a times young researchers can uh, get swayed by certain literature that they read and do not really start contradicting that. So you have to be a little careful about it, and then of course writing the literature review. Now let me take you to a very interesting story. When I say are there any downsides to these methods, I would like to share a story with all of you. uh, all of you would have heard of Linus Pauling. Linus Pauling is uh, a Nobel laureate who won Nobel Prize twice, once in chemistry, and if I'm not wrong, second time in peace. And obviously, a Nobel laureate, he's a researcher par excellence. So, one cannot dispute the kind of research that the Nobel laureate has done. So, in 1986, a, he wrote a book which is titled How to Live Longer and Feel Better. So, Pauling argued that if one takes very large doses of vitamin C, it will prevent common cold. Now, I suffer from common cold quite often, and if that were true, I would have been very happy. I would have been popping vitamin C tablets every now and then, and therefore I would not have got common cold. But somehow, uh, I tried taking a few every day, maybe 4 to 5, it did not help. Anyways, that apart. So, basically the idea that he brought about came from a literature review that he carried out, and that was a non-systematic one in the traditional narrative review style, which usually experts do. So what he had said is that if one takes 200 times the amount of vitamin C that usually the nutrition board would recommend, then the person will not catch cold ever. Very good. A few years later, there was another researcher called Paul Nifschild. Nifschild and his colleagues, they tested Pauling's claims. Uh, they they tested it by carrying out a separate exhaustive research of databases, and they searched journal articles, they searched special collections, and they eventually identified about 61 trials, of which 15 were methodologically very sound. Now, based on that, they concluded that even if one takes more than 200 times of the prescribed dose, one still cannot prevent a common cold. Now, at best, it might shorten the duration. So, where did it go wrong? Now, why do we find two contradictory observations from the same set of literatures? Now, in fact, what had happened when Pauling did his work, his review did not mention five of the top 15 papers that Nifschild was talking about. Now, he took 10 of the papers, which means that he took two-thirds of the literature available, and he ignored one-third of the literature, which were the most vital of the literatures. And out of those 10, there were two which, excuse me, there were two which he only mentioned in the passing. Now, even if you are an expert, if your review is imperfect, your results will be incorrect. Now, if Linus Pauling could do that, you and me can anytime go wrong on our literature review. So therefore, we must look at something else. And now when I say something else, we obviously can look at the systematic approaches. But when we look at systematic approaches, let me tell you a joke. Now the joke goes like this, that for every, Newton said for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, right? Now, this joke says that for every expert there is an equal and opposite expert. Now, something which I've been talking about since yesterday, that there is a contradictory view which will come up if you look at any view that has been proposed. So, if we look at the traditional narrative form, we find another, kind of a different view in the form of systematic approaches. Now, what are the systematic review approaches? It attempts to collate all the relevant evidences that fits into uh, a pre-specified eligibility criteria. So you have a question, and to address the specific question, you will find that your your evidence that you are collecting will fit into some pre-specified criteria. Now that is what is important. So if your pre-specified criteria was to look for the right amount of dosage of vitamin C, which can prevent you from getting common cold, then you have set your eligibility criteria right in the beginning. And then you will criteria wise look at what answers that question. And that is what we do in systematic reviews. So what it does basically is we sorry. Yeah. So what it does basically is it uh, helps you with a very, very clear set of objectives which are explicit, which are reproducible. A systematic search will attempt to identify all the studies, as I said, which would meet the required eligibility criteria. An assessment of the validity of the findings of what are the included studies and why you are not including certain studies. You remember the rubrics? We spoke about that there. This would also synthesize all the literature in the right manner. If you look at the two forms, and I've put up a small comparative summary, you can look at this. So if you look at the systematic review versus the literature review, systematic review is very, very focused. It is focused on a single question. The traditional narrative form may not be so. Uh, your in systematic review, the plan is included, whereas in the traditional narrative form the plan may not be included. So if you look at this entire comparative summary, you will get to know why we prefer to do systematic review as opposed to literature review. I'm not going through point by point each of these because that would unnecessarily be a waste of time. We may look at something else which is more meaningful. So, therefore, let's move on and look at what would it take for you to do a literature review. And I'm putting it up as a step-by-step approach, and you can just go through with me. And wherever you have even the slightest of the dissonance, please stop me and ask as to what exactly I mean by that. So the first thing, okay, so if you have to do the literature review, the first thing you have to do is yesterday we spoke about an idea, a trigger. So here I'm talking about you define a topic, right? Now, once you have defined the topic, then your next stage comes. The next step is formulating research questions. Now, it is very, very important to identify what kind of questions will be addressed by the literature review. So, what are the things you want to do at this stage? If you wish, you can make a note of this. So, at a minimum, you can look at where was the research done, when was the research done, by whom was the research done, in which geographical area was the research done, what kind of methods were used for the research, what kind of subjects were examined in the research, what were the variables which were measured, uh, were there any patterns which were found in the research results, uh, were there multiple disciplines in the research. So some of these things you should be concentrating on when you're looking at formulating the research question. Now, what you can do basically is you can create an Excel sheet, and that's a good idea. Create an Excel sheet and start putting all of these there so that you have a very systematic way of documenting all the literature. Of course, there are softwares. I'm not going to that. Identifying keywords now, uh, you know, it's important that you identify proper keywords because you need relevant literature, and there is a danger of getting a lot of irrelevant literature. A lot of irrelevant literature, if it is not sifted properly, then there is a problem. You will get into literature which is not relevant for your studies, and therefore your literature review would be weak. The second point that happens is that if you get into some irrelevant literatures, you're wasting your precious time. As it is, it's a daunting task. As it is, it takes a lot of patience to do that kind of research at that level. And therefore, getting stuck with irrelevant literature should be avoided by any means. Now, I have a quick two tips for you. When you have keywords, one of the things which you may need are synonyms. So take a keyword, take its synonyms, and start searching for the relevant literature. The second thing that you can do is you can talk to your librarian. Librarians are very good in searching. They're very good in searching for the right kind of uh, papers from the databases that you have in your respective colleges. We seldom use the power of a librarian. So my recommendation to all of you would be talk to your librarian. If you can get him on board with you, it's you will find that he's adding a lot of value to your research. uh, Now, the other tip I can give you is that examine the keywords of the frequently cited papers, and that could be a good place for you to begin. So, if you look at your area of activity and you look at the papers which are frequently cited, and you look at the keywords of those, you will find that your work becomes much easier. So please keep these notes very handy when you are looking at identifying keywords. Once you've done that, the next stage then comes is that you have to go to the databases. Right now, yesterday somebody asked me about databases. Now, uh, somebody asked me how many databases do we need, or how many research papers would we ultimately need, etc., all that. So now you can look at any of the databases. You have, ProQuest, you have Emerald Insight, you have EBSCOhost, you have JSTOR, you have got the Google Scholar as well. So, you can look at any of these databases, or you can also look at some of those industry databases, CMI, IMIS, etc., and get your required information, required papers, required data from there. Now, usually, my suggestion to all of you would be that a mix of databases is the best, option for researchers. So it will help you to cross check if your searches were sufficiently comprehensive. Now, somebody said, how many papers, etc. Now, there are two things. One is you may get into too many papers, but too many irrelevant papers, and I'll come to that a little later. Uh, but if you look at, let's say, two databases. Now, if you look at two databases and you look at the papers in database one and database two, let's say ProQuest and EBSCOhost, and you search with the keywords and you get your literature, you will find that there are most of the papers are same, which is there in ProQuest, it's there in EBSCOhost also. But apart from that, there are a few papers which are there in ProQuest, not in EBSCOhost, and which are there in EBSCOhost and not in ProQuest. So that you should look at it very, very seriously. So therefore, how many databases to be searched? At a minimum, I would suggest two, but it depends on the time and resources available. Many times in some colleges, you'll only have access to one database. So if you can have access to another database through a friend of yours, through a collaborator of yours, please go ahead and do that. Now, the it also depends on how much time do you have with you. You obviously do not have a whole lot of time to keep searching, etc. So you'll have to somewhere look at the time availability, the resources that you have in your hand to do the searching, database searching. Now, sorry. Now, you will also have to take a call on the risk of missing out a relevant study. Now, what is the risk of missing out a relevant study versus how much more time, where do I get it, whom should I approach, etc., all that. Now, this is something which you have to look at, and we all struggle every time because we all come from institutes where we do not have all the possible databases. We will at best have one or two databases, and we'll have to work with those. That's why I said look for at least two databases. Now, again, when you're looking for searching of articles, be very sure of the journals the specific journals that you want to look at. So do hand search the selected journals. That's extremely important. So you have searched database in general, whatever you have searched in, let's say, two databases, then you hand search selected journals as well. Now, uh, obviously, to find out what is a relevant paper, again, a tip, one of the finest sources of searching for a relevant paper is the bibliography of the paper that you have now found out. So go through the bibliography and you will find some more papers which are absolutely apt for your study. And that's a good way to look at what could be your entire papers that you would take up. Does that make sense? Yesterday somebody asked this question. Is there anything else specific to this that you would like me to respond to?
Sir,
Yes, please.
good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, I was asking for literature review. Where are the sources, sir? Like you were telling librarian support and all.
Okay, the sources are the databases that I spoke about. Let's say ProQuest is one database. You can have Emerald Insight, you can have EBSCOhost, you can have JSTOR, and Google Scholar is available for everybody.
Thank you, sir.
So these are the databases, and as I said, most colleges, all AICT colleges have to have one or more databases. So therefore, you will find one or more database there in your college. So if you have one database, fine. Now look for a collaborator who has another database in his college, and together you can then have access to two databases. Now that's in a resource crunch situation, that's one way where you can look at how do I maximize the availability of resources by collaborating. So that is what I meant. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So let's move on.
Subhendu sir, good evening.
Good evening.
This is Dr. Divyesh. I believe yesterday there was a question with regard to the number of literature reviews that should be restricted to in the introduction part, and the number of literature that we need to put it across in our literature review.
Right.
So you said you will address that today.
Yes. Now, there is no hard and fast rule in terms of I have to use this many. Say, for example, in one of my papers, me and my researchers, we got stuck with just about 15 papers which were relevant to the study. Now, obviously, 15 papers, it's not sufficiently enough. So therefore, what we did was we broadened the topic a little bit. We found that it was very, very narrow focused work, and therefore there were not too many papers that we were getting. So, and then when we looked at, I spoke about synonyms. We looked at synonyms, we used those synonyms, and then we found that there were about 50 to 60 papers, and that was good enough for us to work on it. So there's no hard and fast rule, but then at a minimum, try and keep about 30 papers. That's something which is kind of acceptable, but below that would be a little difficult for you to justify. At a maximum, it is difficult if you are writing a thesis. Many a times I've heard many of the professors say that you should read about 250 to 300 papers. Now, if I look back at my PhD, I had read about 120 odd papers, but those 120 odd papers gave me enough information to successfully write my thesis and defend it. So I would say for a paper, at a minimum, look at 30 number, but there is no, it's not that, somebody has put that figure and said that, yes, 30 should be the number, but at a minimum, you should look at for 30. If it's less than 30, then try and broaden your topic, look for some other variables, look for synonyms, and search for a little more number of papers. So if you're writing a paper, 50, 60 papers, good enough. More than that,
Okay.
You will end up getting similar kind of things getting repeated. However, if it's a thesis, yeah, something like 200, 250, ideal.
Okay. So can I put it like this? Like
Yeah.
when we are writing the introduction part, can we restrict ourselves only to the background literature related to background of the study, and then when it comes to the actual literature review, cover major portion of that?
Okay. It is also not like that. Now, when we are writing the introduction, you are using the literature with a certain specific purpose. So if you look at, when I told you what are the things that are there in introduction, you will find that there is a need for justifying the the work that you are doing by highlighting what has not been done before, right? So that's something which is extremely important. So all those literature which is relevant to that, you bring in there. But then if you look at, okay, I'll do one thing. I will share that full paper with you, and you will notice that the literature review we have done using the keywords that have come in when we were writing the introduction. So it is not in the form of a section called literature review. So whichever were the key things that we got during the study for the introduction, then we started looking at all the literature that are available in that particular area. So that is something which is extremely important. Let me share that with all of you. Just give me a second.
Thank you, sir.
Just give me a second. I will share that with you, which is the whole paper. Please check if you're getting it.
It says permission is required. Access. You need access to get this file.
Oh, 1 second. Just give me a second. Yeah, I've given free access, so you can have a look at it.
Sir, a related question. Can I put it now?
Yeah, please.
When we have introduction as a separate section and literature review as a separate section, obviously the papers, the citations that we are giving in the introduction will be revisited in the later part in the LR, right,
yes,
sir?
Yes, it will.
So it is the same data point that we are referring twice. How do we differentiate?
No.
Is it okay?
No, not necessarily. So that is what I'm saying. So if you look at, if you can open the paper, all of you, I'll address this question through this paper itself. So if you can come to the first page, let me also open it. So here we are talking about in the introduction the certain studies which have happened in the context of the emerging markets. What are the market drivers? And we are talking about a framework which we feel that it does not address the concerns of this, specifically the market that we are talking about. And if you look at it, it largely talks about the framework, 4A framework, and the attempts that have been made by some people to extend that 4A framework. However, despite all that, there is a gap, and that's why we say, that whether this framework provides absolute clarity for the sellers of the subsistence marketplaces, that is not sure. So therefore, we wanted to test that out, and therefore, then we talk more in terms of the framework, and we also start talking about how subsistence marketplaces work, what kind of support they need, and here we also talk in terms of what are we looking for from the research paper. So therefore, what kind of research questions we are trying to address, all that. And then, as I said, towards the end, after we justify this, then we say that our findings identify 3 new A's, etc., and all that. And then how is the research paper kind of framed. But if you look at down below next, you'll find what we said is theoretical grounding. So if you look at it, we say market development. Now, there are many, concepts or many areas of market development which has not been covered in the introduction part. That gets covered here. Then we said approaches explaining market development. And this is where we are taking all the papers which are relevant to market development in emerging markets. And then we look at specifically, if we are to look at the subsistence marketplaces, how do we explain it, right? And then, if you look at, there are some subheadings where it says extending the 4A framework, then it talks about subsistence marketplaces, it talks about farmers markets. So you will find that all of these together then make the entire story. At the end of the day, I'm putting across a story to the audience that, look, this is what is the whole story all about, right? So therefore, introduction is the literature that we are using in introduction addresses certain things, and those certain things we discussed yesterday. Beyond that, when we look at each of the 8 topics and the subtopics that we are discussing, we will have to look at the literature existing in each of those areas. And that is what we study in the literature review. So if you look at, page number 4, page number 5, it goes on, this literature goes on till you come to page number 6, and where methodology starts. So there also, before methodology, again, we re-emphasize that the situation warrants further investigation on whether additional factors may be required to be added to the 4A framework, specifically in the context of the marketplaces that we are talking about. Is that clear?
Okay, sir. Now understood. Still one doubt is there, sir.
Yes,
now, suppose somebody wants to do a paper on your paper.
Right.
Okay. Now, when they go through, you suggested to go to the bibliography.
Right.
Right, sir. To get more idea about the background and all. Now that paper also will have bibliography. Now people will go to those papers also. Now it is like a never-ending loop. It's an infinite loop where we go to one paper and bibliography, then another paper, then again bibliography. So where does it end? How do we make sure that we are not into such kind of a circular motion?
Okay. So one of the terms that I used was, when I said that, a tip on searching of bibliographers. So you look for relevant papers. Now, relevancy is an extremely important term in the context of searching. So it is not as if, let's say, I do not know how many papers we have referred to here, must be about 60, 70. So uh, are all the 70 relevant to your study? Certainly not. So one cursory glance and you will know that out of the 70, there could be about 30 which would be relevant to your study. And therefore you pick up those 30. Now what happens? You look at the abstract. When you look at the abstract, out of those 30, maybe some 5 or 10 may be eliminated. So you've got some 20. Now you go to the introduction. You find another 5 that's eliminated. So from those 60, 70, ultimately what is exactly relevant for you may be about 15 odd. So that is how you look at it. Now in these 15, again you look at their bibliography and check it. It's not that you look at for bibliography of all the papers, right? So what is exactly relevant for you, you will search for that. Say, for example, here we have quoted, let's say, Vietnamese news. Now, that's also come into the bibliography. Now, that's a very, very specific thing which you would not need in, let's say, your paper on subsistence marketplaces, because you will not be probably working on Vietnam. So that's not a useful thing. So straightway you will reject that. So that's a call that you'll have to take in terms of what you consider and what you don't consider.
Okay, sir. Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So let's move on quickly. Uh, so step 5 is about what I just told you: reading and assessing publications. So which basically means that you are trying to look at what is relevant for you. Then structure database. Then you enter. Okay, this is important. First you enter 10% of the papers. Once you have entered 10% of the papers and you are satisfied, you have tested and revised all the categories properly. So the categories, as I told a while back, it could be, where was the research done? When was the research done? Who did the research? What were the types of methods used? Uh, what kind of subjects were examined? Uh, what were the patterns in the research results, etc. So once you have done all of these, then you revise the categories again. And once you're satisfied with your that all the categories have been covered, then you enter the remaining papers. So this 7, 8, and 9 are extremely important in terms of looking at what papers are you going to include and what you're going to exclude and how you're going to do that through all the categories that are to be put in the Excel sheet. Those of you who have worked on the Excel sheet would understand immediately what I'm talking about. Those who have not worked with Excel sheets, I would suggest that you go back and take a paper, take all the important relevant information from the paper and put them as categories in an Excel sheet and check what happens. Step 10 is produce and review the summary table. So you have the Excel sheet with you, you can produce the summary tables. And now after that, you start writing, you start looking at what results you were looking for, etc. And then the revising and re-revising and all that till the draft is ready for submission. So this is extremely important, right? Now, I also spoke about the relevance of papers. Now, there are two terms that I'm going to use here. One is sensitivity, the other one is specificity. Now, I'll give you an example. Now, let's say you're trying to search for a particular, with a particular keyword, a certain number of papers, relevant papers. So, say for example, you have clicked it and you've got 100 papers, right? But when you look at, all those 100 papers, you find that there may be, uh, about 50 papers which need to be retrieved. And you could not retrieve all those 50 papers. You could retrieve, let's say, 40 odd papers. All right. So now your, the specificity therefore comes out to be 40 on 100. So you looked at 100 papers and you've got 40 papers. So specifically, you've got about 40% of the required stuff. So your specificity is 40. The higher the specificity, the better for you, right? So that's something which you have to look at. So it's about getting the right stuff and avoiding the wrong stuff. So even if, let's say your specificity is low, doesn't matter till you've got the right stuff. Now, if you look at something which I wrote here as a highly specific search, is one that retrieves a lower proportion of irrelevant studies. So if you can get very low kind of irrelevant studies, that's important for you. That increases the relevance of the papers. Now, this needs a little bit of a practice, but if you look at how it happens, again, it depends on the keywords. If you have a very generic keyword, let's say, if I look at a keyword as branding, now that's very generic. Branding of what? Now, say for example, if I were to extend it by saying branding of products manufactured by unknown companies. Okay, so now I have narrowed it down. So I might get a more specific literature as opposed to the first time. Now let's say, when I'm saying unknown companies, products, I have not specified what product. So product could mean anything. So again, very vast. So I have to further narrow it down. So say, for example, if I now say branding activities taken up by unknown organic tea growers. You see what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to get my search criteria narrowed down so that my specificity increases. Did you understand this? So many a times what happens is, your search itself, at the search stage itself, the kind of words that you're putting in, the variables that you're putting in may give you a whole lot of irrelevant studies. So you'll have to ensure that you retrieve as few irrelevant studies as possible. That's increasing the specificity. All right. So let's come back to our methods. So the objective of the methods section is to basically describe what you did, how you did, and if a reader reads it, how he should be able to reproduce it. So your research questions, your hypothesis, design, sampling method, all of these would come in the design of the study. It also talks about the statistical analysis, the tools that you use, whether you have used certain specific statistical tools, why did you use it, how was it relevant to your data, etc. And then you also talk about ethical considerations. Say, for example, here if you look at, I've given two statements from my research paper. You can look at it. It says each respondent, Indian farmer, was paid INR 300 as an incentive for the contribution to this research. After the interview, each participant, the Vietnamese farmer, received 100,000 Vietnam dong as compensation. right? Now, why did we do this? We did this because we know that when we are taking away at least 1 to 2 hours of their time in interviewing them, this was in-depth interview, then we are causing loss of, potential revenue for them. A. B. We had received a grant from an Australian university to undertake this research. So, therefore, the grant also had to be used properly. And one of the ways of using it would be to ensure that none of the respondents loses any money on account uh, of giving time to us. So, therefore, if something of this kind happens, please do include it in your paper. That is appreciated. Uh, any other ethical considerations are there? Please do mention it. Say, for example, this paper you will find there is a note given where we said that this research is, based on the grant received from Griffith Asian Institute or something like that. Now, that is ethical work. So please understand that any unethical activity in terms of not mentioning where from you've got the grant, or in terms of any monetary incentive that you had given to your respondents, and not mentioning that is not the right way of looking at uh, writing your paper. So this is something which is extremely important, and please keep that in mind as you go along.
Sir,
All right. Yeah.
sir, where we should incorporate these ethical considerations, like at which part of the paper? Like, should we in the starting, or should we put it at the end before references?
So two things. One is, if you look at the paper here on page 1, you would find mentioned about the research grant that we had received from the Griffith Institute. Can you see that?
No, sir.
Yeah, it would be there. Please check the paper.
Okay, sir.
Please check the paper. If you look at the first sheet, first page, you know, uh, before the corresponding authors, you have this work is carried out with the aid of a grant from Griffith University to the first author.
Yes, sir.
Have you seen this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you have to mention this. Now you can mention it here. You can mention it before the reference. That's okay. Like in one of my other papers, we chose to mention it in the just before the reference. That's okay. There's no hard and fast rule about that, but you do have to mention it. That is
Disclose it.
important.
Okay. Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
you have to provide all the kinds of disclosures. And if you look at the paper inside, you will find this where we have written how much each of the Indian farmers were paid, how much each of the Vietnamese farmers were paid. So that's extremely important. Clear?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So let's look at the results. So very simple results. It whatever you have observed, you write that, you describe it. Okay. So that's how it is. So describe a result for each method that was outlined in the method section. Very simple. So do not kind of get into uh, a critiquing, a commentary, a discussion. Don't do that. Start by recalling the type of analysis. Now, if once again I've taken this from the paper that I have given you, it says qualitative data analysis was undertaken through a process of thematic analysis and whatever. Okay, so it very clearly states what kind of analysis was done. Detail the results observed, referring to the relevant tables and figures. Now, if you look at the paper, please look at figure 3. If you can look at figure 3. So this is the heart of the work, where the first order concepts, the second order themes, they are very, very clearly written. And that is where we identify those three A's. So, whatever you observe, you have to, give it in the form of very clear tables or figures. And I'll come to it a little later in terms of where do we use tables or figures? Do we use text? Do we use tables or figures? And I'll come to that a little later. All right. Now, to make the paper easier to follow and read, it's a good practice to present the results in the same order as the methods. So that's something which you should try and practice. Do not really, whatever your methods, order of the methods are, if your order of the results are different, the reader becomes confused. So this is one tip you take. The second one is, many times while we talk, we use these words. Oh, surprisingly, this happened. Do you know, interestingly, this was the result, etc. In the result section, these are better avoided. Now, this have elements of creating a bias in the minds of the reader. You do not want to cloud the judgment of the reader. The reader is intelligent enough to read and understand what the results are. So please avoid using phrases like surprisingly, interestingly. These are to be avoided. Okay. Now, I want you to discuss this. What is better? Writing results in the text or using a table or a figure? What is better?
A table or figure?
More appropriate.
A table or figure always? Sorry.
Somewhere I heard or read that each table is considered equivalent of 300 words or so. So depending on whether our word limit is crossing that, there we can take a call. Am I right, sir?
Qualitative part of that.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about it, but journals do have their own restrictions in terms of the number of tables or number of figures. So that is there, but I'm not very sure if they have a constant on the number of words in the tables as well. So I need to check that.
Okay, sir.
I'm not aware of this. Okay. All right. So you feel only tables or figures are appropriate to write the results and not text?
I think that would be more appealing, sir. Like when we use the word cloud for qualitative research, I think that attracts the attention of the reader. So,
Okay. That's a
But then you're
predominant.
also leaving the conclusion to the reader. I mean, from a table, the reader has to draw out conclusions. But if you write, you're stating the conclusion and probably making it easier for the reader. Tables and figures we can include in the appendices. Maybe.
Okay. I'm not sure if they have to be put in appendices or towards the end, if you mean that. They can come anywhere, especially as you are reading, and in the flow of your reading, if the table is also there, it's always good. Now, there is no hard and fast rule in terms of whether you should write results in the text or use a table or figure, but some kind of a guideline is that tables and figures should stand alone as uh, giving in the required information. So therefore, once you have put a table or a figure, that should be independently able to give the information. So that is important. But whether there is, whether text can be used or cannot be used, tables can be used, only tables can be used, or figures can be used. No, there is no hard and fast rule on this. So there are no strict rules. Point number one. Point number two, if you can write the results in one or two lines and explain it very, very nicely, please go ahead and do that. What happens is it becomes very easy read without any disturbance in the flow, and therefore, you can do that. But if uh, it's not in one or two lines, if it is more, it becomes verbose. Please avoid writing in text. Use tables, use figures, and these are very, very useful when you have to convey something very complex, and you find that there is an easy way to uh, to uh, convey the message. Now, if you look at, many times we say that pictures are very easy to decipher, pictures are very easy to understand. So that's the case here also. Please put figures, please put tables, and they will be very, very useful in terms of telling the audience what exactly he needs to understand in a very easy way. Now, please understand that journals may have a limit to the total number of illustrations, so use illustrations judiciously. So please read the author's guidelines or the instructions to authors very, very carefully, and then take your call in terms of how many tables, how many figures. Now, these are kind of things which you don't do normally as a new researcher. As you go along, experienced people, and I'm sure there are quite a few experienced colleagues here, when you pick up a journal, when you pick up when you are to submit it, you thoroughly read the author's guidelines or the instructions to authors. But younger researchers do not do that. So my tip here is, please read the instruction to authors or the author's guidelines very, very in a focused manner, absolutely seriously. If you've overlooked that, so therefore it's an extremely good idea to read very carefully the author's guidelines. All right.
So I think
Now,
the new requirement is a alt text. Whenever we put some images or the diagrams, a few of the journals need the alternative text.
okay, what is
So
that?
they specifically requested. This is a new requirement for physically abled people. Those like when they hover over the image or the table that we have put across, the system will prompt the alternative text
Okay.
explaining what is there in the diagram. So that is a new requirement.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I was not aware of that, so I will study on that, and then maybe in my next paper I'll kind of include that as well. So the journals I have published up to this point in time, I have not met with that requirement, but nonetheless, thank you so much for
Recently,
bringing
when I
it to my
sent a
notice.
paper for Francis and Taylor, that was a requirement. So,
Wonderful. So I'll have a look at that. Thank you.
sure, sir.
All right. So figure or table. So this is simple. Tables are mostly useful when you record data, whatever raw data or processed data, when you're explaining calculations, when you are showing some calculated data, showing the actual data values, etc. Or when you are comparing between elements in many directions. So if you look at this presentation also, there are many slides where I have put in some figures and where I have put in some text. Now, wherever I have put in a figure, you'll find that it's usually a table, and you'll find multiple, components where there is a comparison, etc. So the same thing is applicable for the the research papers as well. Figures, they you can put an overall trend, you can put a picture. If you look at the paper that I have shared with all of you, you can find pictures of the marketplaces of both India and Vietnam. Now, it is difficult for me to take the readers to the marketplaces. But the pictures at least will give them an idea as to how the marketplaces look like. Now, it's extremely important when you're reading. As I said, the research paper is like a story. So when you're reading it, it's extremely important that you take your reader through a visuals, thing as well. So use those whenever you want to show a picture, whenever you want to tell a story, uh, which is through the shape, as I said, the marketplace. There is no other way I can tell that story. I can write as many words as possible, but it would be difficult for my readers to understand what the marketplace looks like actually. You have not gone to the marketplace. I have gone to the marketplace. I can visualize it easily. So please remember that you have to think from the point of view of your readers as to how will they understand what you are trying to say. Now, I'm forgetting the research paper. I have to search for it. Maybe at a later date, I can share it with Golanath sir, and then he can share it with all of you. Most of the times, researchers they fall into a trap, and the trap is that because you know your subject well, everything looks very easy to you. So if I look at the market, the Indian marketplace, I've been working in the Indian marketplace for close to about now um, 17, 18 years. So if I'm working here for 17, 18 years, I know exactly what I'm talking about. So for me, when I'm writing, it looks very trivial kind of things. But the reader may not understand it because he has not gone to the marketplace. So one of the problems that researchers have is because it's their own research, their own area that they work in, they grow so much comfort that they omit a whole lot of things thinking that this is too trivial. So please be very careful about that part as well. Uh, Figures can be used to allow simple comparisons between a few elements, right? Now, I've given a comparison here, so please have a look at it. So you'll use tables when you have numbers, figures when you have shapes, tables when you're concentrating on individual data values, figures when you're looking at overall patterns, tables when the accurate or precise actual values are extremely important. So if you're doing a factor analysis and you have those tables, right? So it's extremely important there to put in a table. Obviously, the SPSS also throws a table on that. But say, for example, if accuracy is not that required. Say, for example, in factor analysis itself. So you've got the scree plot. So all of you who have worked on the scree plot, so you would see that there is a place where the graph flattens out. And so therefore we from there understand how many factors are being thrown by the variables. So yes, there the figure can be useful. So table when your data, when your values are accurate, table when it's a little less important, figure. So that's the use of figures or tables for you. Is that clear? Can I move on? Any questions here? Anybody, any questions? Or we can move on to the next activity. All right. I would stop here, take a 5-minute break, and I would like you to, in fact, one of the things which I'm missing is I don't think we have the facility of a breakout room here in Google Meet. If I had that facility, I would have broken you in smaller groups and we could have done this activity. So what I want you to do is, if you have to, think about the utility of the tables in a research paper. If you have to evaluate the tables that are there in a research paper, what are the considerations that you would have? So I will give you the first hint. After that, I would stop for 5 minutes. You may think about it, make your points, and then we will discuss. So, if I were to make a checklist, then I would say, are all the data presented in the table necessary? Now, many a times you know, just now I said something that a researcher finds his own research work very simple, very easy, etc., all that. On the contrary, we also tend to put in a lot of unwanted, unnecessary things. So, are all the data presented in the table necessary? Now, this is one way to evaluate your tables. I stop here and I give you 5 minutes to think about what other things would you look at to evaluate the tables.
Clear and well organized, allowing readers to easily understand the data presented or not. So that is very important.
Okay, very good. What else?
And then the completeness of the table and if it is relevant. Because in the methodology, we say, like based on the research objective, we include a few of the variables. Now, does the table include all these variables that we are discussing, the data points, the statistical measures that we use? Is it comprehensive and complete? That is
Fair
a
enough.
second point which needs to be taken care of, is what I believe.
Okay, so taking on from what you said, can we say that, you know, if we have made all the main results absolutely prominent in the tables, is
Mhm.
that one way to look at whether the tables have been written properly or not? We can also look at, you know, the tables. It's not necessarily, I said tables give you the numbers, but the numbers also tell you some story. So if you look at the titles itself, the title will tell you what exactly is the story behind the table, right? Now, it's extremely important that your title is also prepared properly. So you should look at that point as well. Uh, are all the numbers calculated to the correct number of significant figures? That is again extremely important. So these are some of the things that you have to always look at when you are writing your table. Does the table have any of the weaknesses described above? How do those distract from telling of the story that you want to tell? Now, if you look at any of the research papers, if you look at the tables only help you understand the story better. If the table is distracting the readers from the story, then the table is not at all useful. So please, by all means, just remove that table from your paper. So these are some of the things that you should be looking at when you're looking at a table. Let's move on to the last part of discussion. So in the discussion, you'll start with the recap of your main findings. You'll put the results in perspective with the other reports in the literature. So you'll find in the discussion, there is a mention again of the literature that you have studied, and then you put your results in perspective with those reports in the literature. So this is extremely important. Uh, you will also explain the significance of the results and how they are contributing to what enhancement of the knowledge that you are intending to contribute to the academic community. You also will outline the strengths and limitations. One of the things I've not written is you will also talk about what is the future scope of research. Now, that's extremely important because that gives other researchers an idea in terms of how do I take this research forward and how do I strengthen this work. It also helps you in terms of getting citations. The other researchers will obviously cite you for that. Okay. Now that we are over with the MRAD, let's look at a small activity. Now, I'm putting up something for you here. It says identify which part of a research paper the following phrases came from or could come from. Write one of the following letters at the end of each line. So it can be either I or M or R or D. So say for example, if the statement is like this, it is very likely that dot 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 because of this dot 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 dot. So it would have come from D or discussion. So like this example, please look at each of the statements that has been made here. And I will now stop for about another 2-3 minutes so that you can start putting either I or M or R or D. It is also possible that some of the sentences or the part of the sentences that are given here as an exercise may also appear in more than one of those sections. So if you can start putting that, and after 2-3 minutes we'll discuss this. If others also start contributing to this discussion. Can we start discussing this? Okay, what about the first one? Something yielded a total of dot 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 dot.
I think, sir, it's R. Results.
Results.
It has to be results, right? It cannot be anything else. So it is straight results. Very fine. The next one, the aim of the work described.
Introduction.
Objective.
Sorry?
I, sir, I. Introduction, I think.
Introduction. Yes. So we spoke about what comes in introduction. It's very clearly from introduction, the aim of the work description. So it's basically telling why is this research important? Why am I taking up this work? Right? Okay. That dot 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 was used to calculate dot dot dot.
Methodology.
It can be methodology, it can be the results also. Either of those. So we can look at it in methodology. So these statistical tools were used to calculate or analyze the data. Okay? And in results also it can come. So it can be either of those two. There have been few long-term studies of
Introduction.
Introduction. Yes. You remember yesterday I pointed out, there have been a few long-term, there have been a few studies. However, there is a gap, however, there is a challenge, those kind of things do come up, and that comes up in introduction, and that is where you are strengthening your argument in terms of that there is a gap and there is a need for the gap to be fulfilled.
Yes.
The vertical distribution of dot 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 was determined by. So some distribution, it says. It was determined by. Yes, results. It can also be methods if you are using a statistical tool to say it was determined by such and such statistical tool. So, say for example, we use ANOVA to find out this particular thing, right? So it can be methods as well. So it can be both methods or results. This may be explained by
Discussion.
Discussion.
absolutely no doubts about that. Analysis was carried out using
Methodology.
Methodology.
absolutely methodology. It's straight talking in terms of what tool did we use for analyzing the data. So methodology was highly correlated with dot dot dot.
Results.
Results.
R and D both.
Absolutely. Sorry,
Results.
I heard results. Somebody said something else also.
Yeah, R and D both. Even in the discussion, that can be a part of, I believe.
Yes, even in discussion it can come, but largely it is in results. I do agree with you that many times in discussion we bring some of the things that we have found in the analysis back into the discussion, but largely it is in results. So yeah, you got it right. This is the just one second. Yeah. So this is what we spoke about, right? Great. So let's quickly summarize the various stages of the research process. So I'm not going to you know speak anything here. It is self-explanatory. I would like you to just quickly go through the various stages of the research process. If you agree with me, then I will move on. Is this fine? Can I move on?
Yes, sir.
Yes? Okay, thank you. All right. Now, we have seen abstract, we have seen introduction, we have seen methods, we have seen results, we have seen discussion. In between, we saw where do we fit in the literature, how do we do that. All of these is fine. What about the title? Now, the title is extremely important, isn't it? When do you write the title? How do you write the title? Is there a way to write the title as well? Any thoughts? Anybody? What does the title do? The title is your first communication with your readers. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So it is your first communication, which basically means that all those who will read your paper, or before that, all those who will clear your paper for publication, the editor, sometimes the associate editor, the reviewers, all of those, for them, this is your first communication. And therefore, whether they will be interested in your paper or not is dependent on how they look at your title, whether your title conveys everything that is needed for their attention to be caught, right? So I've put down a few strategies here. These are, you know, uh, very, very simple things. So first strategy I'm talking about is that provide as much relevant information as possible, but be concise. Now, I've picked up from two journals the author guidelines and what they talk about, the titles. So Journal of Macro Marketing says the title should be reasonably short and communicate the main idea of the research. Journal of Cleaner Production says concise and informative. Titles are often used in information retrieval systems. Avoid abbreviations and formulae wherever possible. So therefore, A, you have to provide as much relevant information as possible, but you will have to ensure that you are concise. You cannot go on and on in a big this thing for the title. What is the second strategy? Use keywords prominently. Now, I will dissect the title of my research paper and explain to you step by step each of these areas. So, use keywords prominently. Which words will capture the attention of the readers? So, something you have to understand is that what is it that the academic community will get interested in terms of certain keywords, right? Using of colons or hyphen dash to separate the first keyword containing part of the title from the second, explanatory sections, etc. Those are extremely important. Now, say for example, a title I have picked up, which is Disturbance, Invasion and Reinvasion, managing the weed-shaped hole in disturbed ecosystems. So where do we use colon? Where do we use dash? That's extremely important. All right. The next point, choose strategically noun, phrase, statement, or question. So whether you're going to use a noun phrase or a statement or a question, that's up to you. So, what you do is, let's say, if I say that there are a few words which are clustered around a noun, which is the head noun, then that makes a good title. In this case, you see patterns come as a noun. Right? Pattern can come as a verb also, but in this case, it is a noun. Now, if you look at it, food expenditure, where in urban and rural Indonesia. So it describes everything around the patterns. So this is another way of writing titles. Now, do you use question as a title? When there is no simple answer to be presented, it can be an effective way to write a title as a question. The next point is avoid ambiguity in noun phrases. So I'll give you an example. Say, for example, the point here, soybean seedling growth suppression versus suppression of soybean seedling growth. Now, if you look at soybean seedling growth suppression, is it suppression of growth? Is it soybean seedlings suppression? Or, growth suppression of something? We do not know. But when we say that suppression of soybean seedling growth, so it's very, very clear that we are looking at the suppression of a particular item's growth. The first one is extremely unclear. So please be very, very clear about it. So if you look at I've put the pointers, please take these pointers. And when you write your title, please use these pointers to write your title. In any case, I'll be also giving you, as I said, a checklist which will have components of each of the elements of a research paper, and you can take that, and whenever you're submitting a paper, please go through those, and when you have tick for everything, invariably you will see that your paper is much better. And of course you'll get the reviewers comments. That is something which you will anyways get, but your acceptance rates could be much higher because of that. All right, so say for example, if we look at this in the title.
Yes, sir.
Right? Cite the population or the context studied. Do you find India and Vietnam there?
Yes, sir.
Cite the design. Now, the design I'm writing here, exchanges in subsistence marketplaces, which is also a part of the title. Cite the main finding. Do you find 7A framework there?
Yes, sir.
So you see, if you look at the title, each of these things are covered in the title. Now, the remaining 4 points that I have put in, you can just read that and you will understand what it is about. Now, there are certain things which are to be avoided. So avoid terms such as a report of, the effects of. If there are effects, state what they are. Don't write the effects of. Don't write a report on this, etc. Those are not very well accepted. Use internationally accepted terms. Many a times when we do research in the context of a certain country, we do not use internationally accepted terms. So, for example, one of the papers I'm reviewing now has a term which is very specific to the country from where the paper has come in. I had a great amount of difficulty first to discover, decipher what that is, and then get into the paper. So one of the key points in your paper is please use internationally accepted terms. So we have used subsistence marketplaces. If supposing I were to use that marketplaces where poor people or below poverty line people function, now that's not an accepted term. So be careful about that as well. So for writing a successful title, these pointers are extremely important. However, when I share you with the checklist, you will see that each of those in a question form is given nicely there. All right, so let's move on. Let's look at the publishing landscape. How do you select the right journal? You have to make sure that you invest a good amount of time in selecting the right journal. So the step one is select 3 or 4 preferred journals in your field that you think would accept your manuscript. Now, when I say that you think would accept your manuscript, you know your manuscript, you know whether the scope of the functional areas that the journal caters to, if there is a fitment A. You also know the strengths and weaknesses of your research paper. So if it is not a, let's say, A or A star category paper, certainly you are not going to send there. You will send it to, let's say, a C category journal or a B category journal, and then get that published. So you will have to look at what are your journals that you are going to that have a high propensity to accept your manuscript. Step 2, answer the following questions. Has the journal published similar work with a similar level of novelty that of yours in the last 3 years? That's one thing which all of us keep looking at. If supposing there are very similar work that has been published in the last 3 years, then don't send it to that journal. It won't make any sense. However, if there is something additional that you have brought in, then by all means send it to that particular journal, because then they would like it, because there is something novel that your paper has, which the other papers do not have. Now, the other part of it is very simple. It's not rocket science. It's very, very basic common sense. If you are using this, if your work is similar but is having a new approach, a new theory, or extension of a theory, etc., what will happen is you would have cited a lot of papers from that particular journal. And the journal would really love that. They would not tell you that, but they would love it. So therefore, it's a good idea then to send it to that particular journal. Obviously, you will start looking at the journal scope. the what kind of recent articles that match your manuscript, and therefore then you would uh, send the paper. What is the measure of relative journal quality, impact, whatever, etc.? Uh, that's something which again you'll have to look at. So these are all the things that you look at before sending it to a journal. You also are, uh, you also are time pressed for getting your paper published. There are certain journals which take a lot of time. There are certain journals which take a little less time. So if other things are kind of matching your requirement, you then also look at what's the journal's time for publication. So that's something which is important. Does the journal have paid charges, the article processing fee, or provide open access if you wanted? So these are very, very important things while considering a journal. How do you rate journals? Now I'm just sharing a format with you. You can use this. So you can, make a list, as I said, 3, 4 journals. So journal name, recent publication of similar work and novelty, matching of the scope and recent content to that of your work, the journal quality or the impact factor, time to publication, and if there are any article processing fees or paid charges that you need to consider. All right? Now, please remember, before getting dejected, if your paper is not being rejected, you are not aiming high enough. Now, all those of you who get dejected when your paper gets rejected, please do not. This paper of mine, let me tell you this story. Let me digress a little bit. This paper we sent to the Journal of Macro Marketing, if I'm not wrong, first in the year 2019. They liked the paper. The editor wrote that we liked it, but there are some major revisions required. So we worked on it, sent it back. They were not happy, so they rejected it. So we worked on it again, and we were confident that this paper is a Journal of Macro Marketing worthy paper. So we worked on it. We kept quiet for about a year. We worked on it. We reworked on the model. A whole lot of modifications happened. And we looked at each of those points that the reviewers had given, and we did something more than that. And we approached the Journal of Macro Marketing again, saying that you had rejected it, but we would request you to reconsider the paper because we think that this paper is absolute fit for Journal of Macro Marketing. We could have approached any other journal, we did not. So the editor immediately wrote back saying that I remember your paper. The paper proposition was very interesting. However, if you have put in enough work on the methodology side, we would be we would like to look at it. And we were really happy when we received that correspondence. And we sent the paper again back to them. And after about 3-4 months, we received very scathing remarks from the reviewers. Interestingly, the associate editor is an expert in this area. So he was kind of, an additional reviewer for us. And among the 2 other reviewers, one reviewer had immediately cleared the paper saying that it is fantastic. I do not want any changes. But the second reviewer, he was very scathing and he wanted many more changes. We did that and we sent it back again after a few months. And once we did that, the second reviewer who had very scathing remarks, his remarks became very polite. And he said, yes, you have done some really good work, etc., all that. But I would like certain more additions here. And he gave a few more suggestions. The associate editor, who was also quite tough, he also then started saying, yes, now there is a lot of change in the paper. So let's look at it. But if you can address a few more things. So we addressed those things, and then it went back to them, and then they accepted it. All the while, the editor kept supporting us because he liked the proposition very much. So if your paper gets rejected, please don't get rejected. It's fine. It's okay to be rejected. It's okay to fail. Doesn't matter. What is not okay is to get up and run. So you have to, if you face rejection, you'll have to get up and run again. Now, if you find that the paper is proper fit to a particular journal, then you can always, talk to the editor. And the editors, usually when they like a paper, they will tell that, yes, the idea is good, everything is fine, but there are gaps here or there, so work on it, and they will give you advice. Now that advice will make your paper much better. So therefore, aim high, let your papers get rejected. Don't be rejected if your paper is rejected. All right. Now, I would also quickly take you through the review process because I wear that hat as well. So it's important that you look at the review process, and very quickly, let me take you through the review process. Now, most papers get rejected in the first round of review in the journals. So you would get the manuscript number, and many of you would have faced this as well. We all go through that phase in our research and publication life. We send a paper and we get a manuscript number, and in about a week's time, or sometimes 2 days, sometimes a month or so, the editor says, sorry, it is not working out, etc. All that. So it does not even go to the review stage. Now, a difficult issue to address is the lack of contribution that you're making in the research paper. So focused literature review and a comparison table will help. So this is something which I spoke about in literature review. It is extremely important that your literature review is very, very strong and solid. Lack of clarity in the problem statement. These are some of the common things that happen. Identification of gaps. How would once you've identified the gaps, how would addressing the gap bring in an important change? Now, you have not only to identify the gap, you also have to elaborate how that matters. So if you remember in your introduction, I had mentioned this. Where's the gap and how does that gap matters? Addressing the gap matters. All right. So some fixable issues, incomplete or ineffective literature review. And most of the reviewers will tell you, please look at these particular papers, and that will help you. So good reviewers will give you all of those information. So if there is a need for more data, more analysis, all of those are fixable issues. So the reviewer comes back to you and says that these things, if you can do a little more work, and it will be better. All right. Reject and resubmit, risky revisions. Okay, the door is still open. A slightly open door is always better than a fully shut door. So, as I said, even if a paper is rejected by a journal, when you revise it, it increases the chance of acceptance either with the same journal or with another journal. So it all depends on your conviction. Reviewer response statement is as important as the revised paper. So I've put down a few things in terms of what are included in a reviewer's evaluation form. So if you look at a reviewer's evaluation form, and if your paper is strong enough in each of those areas, then your paper should be fairly well accepted or easily accepted. So is the contribution new? Is the contribution significant? Is it suitable for publication in the journal? Is the organization acceptable? Organization of the paper, structure of the paper. Do the methods and treatment of results conform to accepted scientific standards? So many a times, very simple, thing that the citations are not done properly. There are problems with in-text citation. There are problems in the referencing. Uh, all those papers which are there in the in-text citation, they are not covered in the reference. The reference covers some other papers which are not cited in the in-text citation. Now, these are all serious problems in coming in the way of getting a paper published. So be very, very careful. Are all conclusions firmly based on the data presented? Many a times, the data is something and the conclusions go somewhere else. I've seen so many papers where I find that the data talks about something, the analysis is good, but the conclusion is somewhere else. The conclusion is some other story. Is the length of the paper satisfactory? Please read the author's guidelines. As it said, you will know what is the length of the paper that the journal permits. So you have to keep that, based on the what the journal gives you. Are all the illustrations required? If not, then remove all those which are not relevant. Use only those illustrations which are absolutely required. In our enthusiasm to include certain things, we do not go back, revisit whether those illustrations are an absolute must. So this is very, very necessary. Same way, are all the figures, all the tables necessary? So you'll have to look at each of those figures, each of those tables. Are they necessary, or are they creating some kind of hindrances in the storytelling process? So your research paper, as I said, is a nice little story. So read the paper, and you should, from the abstract till the end, you should find a nice little story flowing. Are figure legends and table titles adequate? So this is again extremely important. You cannot forget any of these. Do the title and abstract clearly indicate the content of the paper? Abstract, as I said, is extremely important. So each of these, whether it's abstract, whether it's title or the abstract or the introduction, each of these are extremely important for you to look at all the various things that I've spoken about, whether they are there in the paper or not. If they are there and your paper is methodologically strong, there may be comments from the reviewers to improve the paper, but it will get selected. Take my word for that. Are the references up to date, complete? I was telling you whether, many a times your reference is not complete. So please make sure that there are no mistakes in that. Whether the journal titles are correctly put, correctly abbreviated. So each of these are extremely important things. And all of these are looked at with absolute, fine scrutiny. So therefore, these are some of the typical questions which are included on reviewers' evaluation forms. How do reviewers assess a paper? So this is how they do it, and you can read this. And where do you get the evidence? I've put that here, so you can look at that, and you will come to know where you will get those evidences and whether you have put it there or not. So I give you a minute to look at this, and then we move on. In the meantime, I will give you, while you keep looking at this, I will give you the checklist. So, so any questions you can throw at me.
Dear sir, can you listen to me?
Yes, yes, very clearly.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful presentation of previous 2 days. We have learned a lot from you. So I have a simple question regarding the ethics of publications, like the plagiarism. So how can we deal with the problem of plagiarism? What are the techniques of paraphrasing, or what should we do? What are the softwares or techniques that we can use to avoid plagiarism problem? Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, good question. Now, that's something which we struggle in our country quite a bit. Now, journals have very, very strict rules on plagiarism. Okay, just 1 second. I will come out of the presentation and let me, you know, put the video on. If all of you also can put your videos on, it would be great. So at least I can, see all of you. So if you can put your videos on, please. All right. So you asked a question on plagiarism. We have quite a few, software for checking plagiarism. So you can use Turnitin, but many institutes don't have that. So getting access to Turnitin is a little difficult task. You can use Viper, which is much more cost effective. So you can talk to your school and get access to Viper. It's a good plagiarism software. In terms of paraphrasing, now there are certain tools which people use for paraphrasing. I would very strictly request all of you to desist from that. Use your own knowledge of understanding to write the thing in your own way. Don't use the softwares available, and I'm not naming any one of them. So don't use them. It only will make your research weaker. So please go through the literature, understand what is there in the literature, and then write it in your own word. Obviously, you have to, whenever you are taking an idea, whenever you are taking something from a paper, you have to cite it properly. That's something which is extremely important. So if you do that, you can always, have a relatively low plagiarism content in your paper.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I got my answer. Thank you.
Hello, Faiza Lakshmi here, sir. Sir, I
Yes,
have a doubt.
please.
Sir, this is my request. Can you brief us with bibliometric analysis?
I didn't get you.
Sir, can you brief us with bibliometric analysis?
Okay. It would be a little difficult for me to do it here, because then we would be starting a new thing, entirely new thing. Now, you have certain tools for bibliometric analysis. You can use those. I think, you can use Zotero, you can use Mendeley. Those are useful tools for you to use. So you can study one of those, and whichever one you develop your comfort in, you can use that.
Okay, sir.
Sir?
Yeah.
Divyashri here.
Yes.
Thank you for the sessions both yesterday and today. I felt like I've learned a lot and I've gotten more perspectives on research writing. My question is, now when we try to submit to journals that take slightly longer processing time, and more so if there is going to be if there are going to be mails coming back and forth asking for revisions and for us to resubmit with all of them done, how relevant will the paper be if the data is already getting old? So if the turnaround time has been, say, about a year from the time that I've actually written the paper and then it's getting published, will it still be as relevant? Or later? I mean, 1 year is what I'm saying, but I've heard that for ABDC journals, it could be even longer. I've heard that it could be up to 1.5 to even 2 years. So that's my question to you. I've always had that with me as a question, and I'm just putting it forth to you. Sir? Are you able to hear me? Subhendu, sir?
I think some internet issue at his side. Yeah.
No, I don't know. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Now we are able to.
Okay. I don't know. There may have been an internet issue at my end. Suddenly I saw the screen black. Okay. So now the point is, it depends on what kind of data you're talking about. Certainly, there are some data which, if it is relevant today, may not be relevant a year down the line. But most data do not have that kind of a short period where it becomes dated. The journals also do understand this. Say, for example, this paper that I have shared with all of you, we sent it in 2018-19, and 2019 we started collecting data in 2017, and then it got published in 2022.
Right. Okay.
So which means that the data is still relevant, but then there could be some research work where the data may not be relevant after such a long time. So in which case you may have to kind of go in for a little more data collection and then create your analysis based on that. So yes, that's a challenge. But most of the times I've noticed it does not really matter. If whatever I have said here, if you can take care of each of these areas properly, your acceptance time could get a little shortened. So then you would not have that problem.
Got it. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Any other question, anybody? If there are no other questions, then Gulanath sir,
Thank you, sir. This is my job to start and conclude the session. So once again, thank you all of you for your participation yesterday and today. It was indeed a wonderful session, a lot of insights and a lot of learning for all of us. And Faiza ma'am asked about bibliometric analysis. In fact, last month we had one workshop, similar pattern, 2 days, and those videos are uploaded in our MTC Global YouTube channel, and you will find out there are a lot of other relevant videos also by many senior academicians related to research and so many other areas. So you can please kindly browse through, go to that channel, and you can look at that. Once again, thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
Can you please rename that channel again?
Yeah, you are there in the WhatsApp group.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll share the link. Okay, in the WhatsApp group, so you can please kindly go through.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Once again, on behalf of MTC Global family, I thank all of you for your participation, and especially today's session was little extended, as I said, that so many things to discuss, and I appreciate, in fact, to such generally, we all are bound by time and a lot of limitations, okay, in our personal life as well. But what I could see is something very, very unique, wherein we are here up to 8:50, close to 9 o'clock, supposed to conclude at 8 o'clock. But all participants are there, and it shows the level of interest and engagement, and also the resource person, the way Sir spoke, that's indeed fantastic. And definitely, we'll plan out some more programs with Sir as well in the coming days. And we look forward to all of you, and see you soon in our next meet. Thank you so much. Thank you, Subhendu sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
being with
sir,
us.
and thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Bholanath sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rijal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Subhendu sir and Bholanath sir. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.